Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Maria Hernandez Ojeda. I am Vice Chair of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives, and I teach Spanish at Hunter College. On behalf of ALBA, thank you to everyone who is attending this event. We're very proud to present the film Into the Fire by Julia Newman, ALBA board member, and we thank her for sharing her film with us. Thank you to the panel for joining the discussion, and also to Joe Labanji, ALBA board member, who will serve as moderator. Events like this are made possible only by your generous contributions. So please consider donating to ALBA at alba-valve.org/donate. We're going to post this link in the chat. Please note that we will record today's event for future viewing. So if you don't wish to be recorded, please turn off your camera. And now I will introduce Joe Labanji, today's moderator. Joe Labanji is Professor Emerita at New York University, where her teaching and research has included the Spanish Civil War and how it is, or it is not, remembered in Spain today. She has also specialized in gender studies in relation to modern Spain. She is currently writing a cultural history of the Spanish Civil War for Reaction Books. Joe, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I will just briefly explain how today's session is going to work. We will be having questions we know there are well over 100 people who are logged in, and it's going up fast. So we won't be able to take everyone's question, but you might like to start thinking about questions you'd like to ask. And we ask you to post your questions in the chat, which is in the middle on the bottom bar in Zoom. And when we will select certain questions, and you will then be unmuted so that you can ask your question live. The other thing I would like to say is I hope that you did all watch the film in advance, as the email invited you to do. But if you haven't, we hope we will still be able to have a good discussion, and that you will be able to watch it later. Because this is being recorded, you will be able to view this panel discussion at any time later on YouTube. So first, let me introduce our three panelists today. Most important of all, the director of the film, Julia Newman. Julia worked in advertising as a producer of television commercials for many years, and as a journalist whose writings have appeared in magazines, in the New York Daily News, in the Miami Herald. Her award-winning documentary, which we hope you all just watched, Into the Fire, American Women in the Spanish Civil War, was broadcast on public television and Spanish television. Both that film and the latest one that Julia has just completed, Still a Revolutionary, Albert Einstein, are distributed in the US by First Run Features. Julia has been executive director of ALBA for 5 years in the past and remains a very active member of our board. The next speaker that we have is Gary Sharfin, who was heavily involved in Julia's film Into the Fire. Through his production company, Private Idaho, Gary edited award-winning ad campaigns and feature films that have been shown at Sundance, Cannes, and the Tribeca Film Festival's drive-in series. His documentaries have aired on PBS and Bravo, including Into the Fire, for which he was co-producer. Gary also directed a series of one-hour jazz programs in Brazil, Tokyo, and New York, as well as TV commercials and music videos. He's currently concentrating on developing and producing documentaries and feature films. And then our third member of the panel is Adam Hochschild, who has 10 books, including King Leopold's Ghost and the New York Times bestsellers, Spain in Our Hearts and To End All Wars. Most of his writing deals with issues of human rights or social justice. He's been a finalist for the National Book Award and twice for the National Book Critics Circle Award. And he's won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize and other awards. He teaches at the University of California at Berkeley, and he's written for the New Yorker, the New York Review of Books, and other publications. One other bit of housekeeping before we continue. We suggest that you switch to speaker view rather than gallery view, because that way you will see the speakers much bigger on your screen, because there are so many people logged on to this event. Before I invite the panelists to speak, we thought it would be nice to play the trailer for the film to refresh memories and also to get us all into the mood.
I was in Germany in 1936 and could not avoid seeing these headlines about the red swine dogs in Spain. I'd been in Spain, but I knew nothing about what had happened, that the king had gone, that there was a republic. But all I needed was to read in a German paper that it was the red swine dogs to know whose side I was on, theirs.
Thank you, Dennis. So I would like to invite you to speak first, Julia. And it would be nice if perhaps you would like to tell us, how did you come to this material in the first place?
It's really through family connections. My father wanted to go to Spain and fight with the Lincoln Brigade, but family talked him out of it. His best friend, Al Wienerman, did go to Spain, and in the ending days of the war was wounded and lost one of his legs. And that was Al was an ongoing presence in my very early childhood and babyhood. And it just stuck with me. The war, the sadness around it, my father's feelings of, I guess, a kind of guilt about not going. He tried to get into World War II and had high blood pressure and couldn't pull that off either. So there's a lot of mood and emotional feeling around this. And when I found out that all of these women had gone I found this out about 25 years ago, when the veterans of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade were giving a dinner and honoring the women who went. And when I got an invitation to that, I saw the names of more than 80 women on this invitation. And I wanted to know more about them. And I met Helen Freeman at this event and shook her hand and was stunned to feel her upper arm, which still had a big dent in it from her wound. And I got more and more emotionally involved in the fact that nobody knew anything about these women. history seemed to be rolling over their participation in this war. And I decided to try to make a movie about it. And the movie you see is what I ended up making with Gary's endless help and advisement.
Would you like to tell us a bit about the research you did? Because it's very impressive.
It was, well, the reason that it took 12 years to finish the film is because of all the research, finding my way to the women who would talk on camera, who would allow an interview. I went to Vienna to interview Irene Goldenspiegel, found my way to one archive after another, and used, there was a little bit of faking out to get access to some material, which Gary knows the most about, which was the Spanish Earth, which is not under copyright in this country. And we managed to get from the Museum of Modern Art's archives. It was an endless connecting of one person after another and being led. As anybody who's done heavy research knows, you go from one lead to another and it's completely unpredictable. You never know where you'll find material.
What you found is absolutely fantastic. Gary, would you like to pick up on that, since you also were able to locate some of the archival material, I gather? And perhaps you'd like to say a little bit about your aunt, who was one of the nurses who went to Spain.
Yeah, well, actually, my great aunt was the,
right.
And I was very close to her. She had never married, and she was like a surrogate grandma to me. I'm one of the few family members I was close to. So I had heard Julia was trying to make the film. We had a mutual friend. And actually it took me a while, as I recall, to try and actually get her to come to meet with me and accept my help. And at first I was just giving her space and had people working on it. And then I got more and more involved to take it over. The research, yeah, the incident she's talking about at MoMA was, we had gone up there to meet with them. We had seen the film. It was phenomenal. It was about the medical units in Spain, and we wanted to use the footage, and they wouldn't give us the footage. They said it would take months to release it. And I happened to have been doing a piece on a school in the South Bronx that won the high school chess championships and was going to Moscow. And it was a vanity project, is probably the wrong word, by Louis Coleman, who you'd recognize his name now on the side of MoMA, their education department, also PBS, big arts contributor with his then wife, Dorothy, was the one underwriting it, this Chess in the Schools piece. So we couldn't get them to release the film. I said, yeah, I know where you're taking it. I know who's handling it archivally for us, transferring it from the original film. But they wouldn't let us, and I said, I will take it to the same people. They wouldn't let us leave. We got our coats on, we got up to leave. I said, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna call someone I know I'm working with is on the board. And the woman behind the desk said, who is that? And I said, Louis Coleman. She said, here, take the film. And so it was total like, wow, okay. I mean, I knew he was high up because actually he had let the kids play chess. He had gotten the kids to play, we had footage of the kids playing chess on a Rodchenko chessboard at MoMA. And so I knew he was pretty important, but I hadn't realized he was that important to the whole process. So that was one. I had a friend who had made a film in Russia on some skaters for CBS, the story of some Olympic ice skaters. So we got in touch with some Russian archives for other footage as well. And Julia was tracking all over Spain and all over everywhere, and here, and just digging up anything. My great aunt, we got some photos of, and we also, Julia discovered some photos of her as well. So it was pretty, it was a long, arduous journey.
That gives a real insight into how research works. You have to be very good friends with the right people.
It helps.
Adam, perhaps you'd like to tell us how you came to the subject of the Spanish Civil War.
Well, I wish I could say that I came to it because I had an ancestor who fought in it. Unfortunately, I did not. But one of the first jobs I had was as a newspaper reporter at the San Francisco Chronicle in the 1960s. And two other reporters at the paper, both men 30 or 40 years older than me, had fought in Spain. And when times were quiet in the city room, I used to talk with them. And that was when I first started hearing about the war. And then subsequently, my wife and I became very good friends for many years with several volunteers who'd been in Spain, whom I'm sure some of you listening know or knew, Bill Sennett and Hank Rubin, who was actually in the medical detachment and wrote a lovely book about his experiences there. I just wanted to say how much I admired this film. It's a lovely, powerful film. I was just as moved seeing it again this weekend as I was when I saw it for the first time 6 or 7 years ago. And I think it's an important film because in addition to being really the best documentary in recent decades made about the war, it's a reminder that not everybody who volunteered carried a gun. And in that connection, I'd also strongly recommend a book, War is Beautiful by James Nugas, who was an ambulance driver with the medical unit. And two people with ALBA, Peter Carroll and Peter Glazer, did a real service in editing that manuscript, which was only discovered 10 years ago, and publishing it as a book. I think it's the finest piece of writing by an American volunteer in Spain. Let me just say one final thing, which is that, as we can see in the chat, there are descendants of many volunteers who are in this session. And I know among them is the daughter of Helen Freeman, the nurse who appears in the film, who was severely wounded. Her daughter, Margot Feinberg, and her son-in-law, Fred Ross, are with us. And I welcome them and all of you who are from the families of volunteers.
Thank you, Adam. The questions are starting to come in. We'd like to start with a question from Rochelle Gatlin. So you should be unmuted so you can ask it in person. If it doesn't work, I have the text and I can read it, but let's hope you are able to ask your question in person. Rochelle Gatlin. No, not coming through. In that case, I'll read the text of Rochelle's question, which is, why does the film never mention the Soviet Union and the role played by the Soviet Union and the Soviet Communist Party during the Spanish Civil War? Maybe that's a question for you, Adam, whichever of the three panelists would like to answer that one, or Julia, maybe.
I wasn't one of the filmmakers, so I think I'll let them.
Okay.
I can answer that if Julia.
Okay, Gary.
Because I was part of that decision. Yep.
Is that Rochelle? Hi, thank you very much.
Okay.
Oh, okay. Now I can speak, but I was muted by the host before.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I know there were complications politically with the Soviet Union. I don't know if Soviet women participated at all or anything about it. It's just not mentioned.
Well, this was specifically about the American women.
Yeah.
Number one, the film set is, the subtitle is American Women.
Mm-hmm.
We de-emphasized, I would say, any Soviet participation, primarily because the view, I would say we de-emphasized any communist references necessarily because the view of what it meant to be a communist in America changed dramatically between the 1930s and present day, and had a very different connotation. So anyone born, you know, during the Cold War or the McCarthy era or raised that way potentially had a very different view. And so what we wanted to keep the emphasis was it was a democratically elected government overturned by a military coup, and these were Americans who felt strong enough about it to go and participate and risk their lives and give up their careers. And that was where we were putting our emphasis.
I know it's the film is beautiful, but you left out some of the complexity, and you also lost an opportunity to teach them history. That's why when the word socialist is thrown around, everybody just, that's it, because we don't know enough. We don't know the context, the history, and you had an opportunity, and I think you didn't use it. You know.
It may appear that we had an opportunity, but we didn't really. None of these women were members of the Communist Party, none of them. They were humanitarians and politically strongly on the left. It's a very complicated business. I've just been rereading Adam's book, Spain in Our Hearts, and got a refresher course in just what the Soviet involvement in this war was. And it was pretty puny. That's somebody else's film. So if you know somebody that's interested in making that film, I'd love to see it. There's just so much you can cover. And the film is only 58 minutes long. Remember, that was a PBS hour then. PBS hour is something more like 53 minutes now. The rest of it is advertising. But if you try to tell too much, people's minds boggle, and they don't take away what you want them to take away. But I would like to see that film, as I said.
Well, thank you so much for explaining it. Yeah, thank you. I think
Sure.
you were right, actually.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have another question from Elizabeth Starchevich. I may be mispronouncing your name. If you're there, Elizabeth, and if Dennis can unmute you, then you can ask your question in person.
Right, do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually joined with the last comment to say I think that it's a wonderful film, and as I wrote in my comment, I met Leni DeVries when I was 17, and she was a spectacular person, and so I was fascinated to see. Well, she's being played by somebody else in the film, but I was so interested to see her in that role. And I also ask, which I see someone else asked later, when the men came back, and I think this is where you're diluting the significance of the role of of communism in the world at that time. The men were very much excluded from daily life possibilities, because they were being accused of being communists.
Right.
And there's maybe one line at the very end of the film that implies the women met some obstacles when they returned, but it isn't clear whether there was the same climate of exclusion, political exclusion, obviously, and economic exclusion, and attacks on them as communists. So I'm just interested whether you found that or not.
I saw that Bruce Barthel, hi Bruce, comment was that Ruth David Howe was a member of the Communist Party. The footage I have of my interview with Ruth, she says that after she came back from Spain, she joined the party, that she went to a couple of meetings and had no patience for all these meetings. The party members had meetings all the time, and she just didn't want to go to meetings, and she dropped her membership in the party. So that, for Bruce, Ruth is on the record on film having said that. I'm sorry, I got lost in Bruce's comment.
I asked if the women received as much anti-communist rejection as the men did receive when they came back.
Gary?
Yeah, my great aunt came back and could not, she was working as a high school nurse in Westchester County, and they were going to fire her because of it. She also attempted to enlist in World War II, and at first they would not, and then I think they were desperate for nurses who had more experience. She was also older, and she was permitted, but she was going to be fired as a premature anti-fascist was the term they used to describe them. She was never a communist. She was a socialist, actually. My grandmother, her sister, was a communist. But she was going to be fired from White Plains High School nurse because of her politics. The only reason she kept her job was she saved the principal's son's life, I think, who was being misdiagnosed for something, and he fought to keep her on, was the story I had heard from her and family. So yes, it was true.
There's another question from Alicia Fernandez. Alicia, are you there to ask your question live? No?
Hello?
Hi, you are there. Alicia,
hi, hello, hi, hello from Barcelona. It's much later for us here, but
thanks for logging in.
Yeah, really happy to be able to join you. I just had a question. Well, it's more just out of curiosity, really, because we see, well, I think the film wonderfully shows the work of these women in the rear guard, doing an invaluable work that kept, you know, the Republican effort going. And I'm just interested to see whether the filmmakers managed to gather any information about the relationship of these women with the militia women from America that were fighting on the front, because we often see the images, which I guess was the most common scenario, of them tending to male volunteers, but just also if there's any information about the relationship with fighting women on the front.
Who would like to take that one? I mean, I could answer it if.
Oh, yes, please, Joe.
I'm not aware that there were any American militia women.
Right.
Working. And the question of the Spanish milicianas, militia women, is actually a very interesting one, because as you will know, many of them signed up at the start of the war. There are lots of photos. They became a kind of a sort of fashionable image in magazines at the time, and in documentary films, mostly made by anarchists, in their kind of dungarees.
Yeah, the overall
fighting at the front. But the Republic actually recalled all the women from the front in late 1936, and by May 1937, they were completely banned from the front unless they stayed on as nurses or cooks. It's one of the more tricky things from a kind of women's studies point of view, that the women played a completely active role at the beginning, though Mary Nash, who has written about this, has noted that they often, in fact, got pushed into roles as cooks and nurses at the front, even though they were there supposedly in the trenches with their guns. So the militia women have been glamorized quite a lot, a little bit more than they perhaps should be. And it's a slightly complicated story because they weren't given as really the opportunity to fight as equals with the men, which is what they wanted. So some of those photographs where they do look, they're mostly actually in the cities, most of the photographs of the militia standing there in their rifles, next to them on the ground with the men around them. There are some wonderful photographs by the Catalan photojournalist Agustí Centelles of milicianas on the Aragon front, which I love because they're totally unglamorized. They're not especially attractive. They might even be a little bit fat. Their overalls look a little bit tatty, but they're there and they're all women talking to each other. And these photographs are, I think, are the testimony I know best of the women militia who were there actually in the trenches at the beginning. But they were all pulled back by the Republican government in late 1936, and by May 1937, there were no more milicianas in the war.
I mean, I focused my research mainly on British writers for my thesis, but I know for a fact, as you were saying, for instance, when Sylvia Townsend Warner tried to arrive in Spain, she had to do it through applying for an ambulance driver license. So, thank you very much.
That's what Evelyn Hutchins in the film, she talks about that. You know, she wanted to be there as an American fighting with the men, but she signed up as a truck driver.
Yeah, exactly.
That was the only way she could get to the front.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Margot Feinberg is with us. Are you there, Margot? This is Helen Freeman's daughter.
True. Hello.
Hi, hello, Margot.
Hi.
So, hi, Julia.
Hi.
I was just gonna, as each question came, I had a thought, and I had my own thoughts, so I'll just try to condense it all together. Which is, I agree with Julia that many of the women went, they were not, I don't know that, but they weren't members of the party. My mother herself went out of a response to humanity. She felt a need to go, much like I think many people feel right now when you see democracy challenged, that you have to step forward. So I think there's lots of similarities to some things that we're seeing today. She herself was not blacklisted. Many of her friends were not. In fact, many of them went on to serve in various forms of public service. My mother, because she was injured, couldn't go to World War II, but went with a federal program to Peru, Ecuador, to serve as a public health nurse. So many people didn't, but there were people like Leni and Freddie, I think maybe Freddie's daughter's on there, but anyhow, who wound up in Mexico, I think in part because they felt the need to get away from what was happening here in the United States. So I think, that varied. As for the women relating to other women in Spain, I don't know, but the one thing I would say and why this film is so interesting and powerful is that many of you may know that these women stayed friends for decades and decades, that experience, even though they had many, many other amazing experiences, which is another film, but remained friends to the bitter end, So I grew up with them, Freddie and Leni and Ruth Davidow and Becky Durham and all of them. So there was a bond even that formed that sisterhood at that time. I think that's why they were role models for many of us, including today. And then the thing that I wanted to say, which was that I've been thinking about Spain a lot in these times that we live in because there was a terrible defeat. And yet all of these people went on to fight and we're still fighting. And then someday, many decades later, democracy returned to Spain. And we have to hold on to that even in a sad moment, which I think actually we have had a victory in the United States, it's a historic thing. It's something that lends us guidance on many, many fronts, including that determination to continue to fight for democracy. So that's it for me for now. And hello to all those Feinberg friends.
Thank you so much, Margot, for being with us. Do you want to respond, Julia?
I think Margot said it all. Yeah, they were friends forever, and managed to stay friends forever, even with little disagreements on one topic or another. But I should note that Helen was the supreme diplomat of all of those women. She calmed down any frictions between them that grew in the ensuing years. She was just a wonderful center for those women who were in Spain and had that experience.
Right, we have another question from Paige Delano. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You there, Paige, to put your question?
I had a question. I love the film. I agree with some of the comments about not mentioning the Communist Party. I think a lot of documentaries about the left have kind of failed to do that, but maybe the new movies will do that. My question, though, was just very simple. Who was the woman with the hypodermic needle? I think that's the question you're referring to, right?
That's right, yeah.
Who was she? She appears a number of times in the film, and I know that Julia, you're looking for images that fit the discussion. So you have the milicianas that weren't really part of the nurses community at all. But who was this woman?
I wish I could answer you that question. She's not identified in that footage, and I didn't recognize her in any of the photographs or footage I saw of, and there's a lot of it in Spain. I'm sorry, I wish I knew.
I'm waiting for another question to come through to me. Well, it's just come through, but actually I've been dying to ask a question myself, if I can take advantage of being the moderator. It's a question for Julia, or really a comment asking Julia to elaborate. For me, the best thing in the film, and I watched it again for, I don't know how many times I've seen this film, because I teach it and Julia's come to my classes to talk to students, which they love. But what really struck me again watching it today is, I think, for me, the best thing is the only voices in the film are the voices of the women, whether in original interviews or whether actors reading out text, letters, articles by these women. I thought that was a stroke of genius, to have no voices except the women themselves. Would you like to say a little bit about what made you take that decision? How did you come to that decision?
From the outset, I just didn't want there to be a man's voice in the film. It was about the women. And the only time you hear a man's voice is that brief clip from The Spanish Earth where Ernest Hemingway talks as a sentence or two. It was their story, and I didn't want there to be some omnipotent announcer voice who seemed to be telling their story or leading them in any way. And a couple of people tried to discourage me. A couple of filmmakers, one in particular, tried to discourage me. And actually, when I described it to him, he said, "Oh, you'll never be able to pull that off. You really need a narrator," which probably strengthened my resolve. And Gary was completely up for that. So we just made it happen and cast all of these wonderful actresses to say their words. And the best casting director probably in America did this job for me all these years. His name is Bernie Telsey. Did this job for me for free. He just we sent a description of each of those women to him, and he gave it to one of his casting directors, and she sent us all of these women to audition ourselves. And it was an enormous gift. And he's one of the many people thanked for their role in the film.
It was a great decision. There's a question here from Abby London. Abby, are you with us to ask your question? Abby London? Okay, I'll read out your question. If you come online and are unmuted, interrupt me so you can ask it yourself. So the question is, it's a technical question. Did you use the research on American women volunteers in the brigades by the late Frances Partey? My late husband, Mark Crawford, and his co-author of the Lincoln Brigade, William Lorin Katz, had a whole section of the book on women in Spain.
Gary?
I didn't know that book was ever finished. I met her, I went to see her and picked up her interview with my great aunt just before my great aunt died. I have the audio from that interview, but I don't think, I wasn't aware actually that the book was ever finished or published, and I certainly don't know if it was at that time, at the time we were making the film.
Abby, are you with us to answer that question? It looks like...
Can you hear me now?
There you are. Oh, hi.
Hi, you're Abby.
Hi.
No, my husband's book was published, and there was a lot of sections throughout on the women. But in reference to Frances's research, I know now that it's in the archives at NYU.
Yes.
I don't believe her thesis was published, but it was an enormous amount of work that she had done over the years, the interviews of many of the women that you have in the film. She had already interviewed, and I was wondering if you had, but I heard the response. So, okay, now I know that it didn't come to a fruition into any type of publication.
Hi, we have a question from Jennifer. Jennifer, are you there to pose your question in person? Hi.
Hi. First, thank you all so very, very much for hosting this event and for making it so accessible to see this very interesting film. And thank you to the panelists. It's really what a nice, meaningful way to spend a Sunday afternoon. We're really fortunate. And my follow-up question, please, is it's so interesting what our visitor from Barcelona brought up about the women. And I was wondering, do we know why the women were recalled from the front lines and ushered into more traditional, or so it seems anyway from the outside, more traditional women's roles?
Shall I take that, or would anyone else?
Yes, please, Julia.
That one. You're probably not going to like the answer to that, gender bias, but I should put it in context. It was part of the Republican government's attempt to produce a coordinated army rather than one made up of independent militias, which were not coordinated in any way, who fought very bravely, but you really can't win a war if you've got a whole lot of small militia groups doing their own thing with very imperfect communications, not knowing what anyone else is doing or what's over the next hill. So in the fall of 1936, the Republican government decides it has to integrate all the militias into the regular army. And the regular army, of course, was a regular army of men. So that's the main reason, but there are writings which one kind of wish weren't there, but are feeling that the women were a sexual distraction for the men. There's no evidence that that actually was the case. Some very unpleasant suppositions. This is not on the part of American volunteers. This is on the part of official figures in Spain, in the Republic, that they were prostitutes. Some prostitutes did sign up as milicianas, and good for them. And there was also a fear that they were spreading venereal disease. But I mean, largely it's about bringing the army, all the uncoordinated, independent, autonomous militias into a coordinated government-run army, and government-run armies at the time were male. But there was undoubted prejudice against having women at the front.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any more questions forthcoming? We've still got time for some more questions. I'd like, while we're waiting for more questions to come through, I think to invite each of our panelists to say what they think is the best thing about the film. I've already said what I think is the best thing about the film. You can say the same thing if it is, but I imagine you may be able to think of other things that you think are the best thing about it. I mean, with hindsight, Julia, what are you most proud of?
Getting it finished, I think, is something I'm the most proud of, since of course it did take 12 years to fund the film and find, for us to find our way to all the material. But it's sort of like asking what your favorite child is. I loved the process. It was a great adventure on every level. I got to film in Vienna, to search in the archives in France and at the Filmoteca in Spain, and at all the archives in the States. It's, for me, this kind of research is thrilling. And to meet all of these women, and some of them in their gorgeous eccentricity. My chat with Toby Jensky, who was a heck of a character. Becky Durham was visiting her when Toby let me come by and talk with her. She refused to be interviewed on camera. But she was certainly very loquacious during this meeting. The room with the two of them was such fun. They were so easy and so lively. All of these women were wonderfully lively. Ruth Davidow, who insisted on being on a swing that went back and forth, which gave Vicente Franco, our cameraman, a bit of a job to do, but the interview was wonderful. The whole thing, I can't pick a moment. I can't pick a thing. Maybe Gary can, but I can't.
Gary, what is for you the strength?
I would agree with you. On one hand, it was a conscious decision, and I do remember the moment in editing when we were struggling with telling the story without a narrator, and how do you frame the events that were going on. And at some point in that, Julia had said, it had come up about Martha Gellhorn communicating with Eleanor Roosevelt with what was going on. And the decision was, we have to scour through all that so we can get the historical contexts to be able to tell the story. But also, to me, the combination that these women gave up, you know, that they were nurses, they were professional women in the 1930s, put their careers on hold to risk their lives with no material, no any, like starving. I mean, my great aunt would always tell the story. She arrived in Barcelona and all hell was breaking loose. And they were boarded up in a fancy hotel, drinking champagne and eating ladyfingers because that was the only food available to them for 3 days. But the notion of that, and also when you see them as older women, the notion that you see an old woman on the street or you're behind her online and she's buying groceries, what these women did and what they went through, they were heroes, and they were quiet, silent heroes. And to give them their due was really wonderful to accomplish, I think.
No, I agree very much with that. It makes you wonder, the people you see in the street, what stories they make that are not told. There's a documentary I like very much made in Spain about the rural guerrillas who went on fighting the Franco regime after the end of the war. And it starts with one of them who coordinated the guerrilla force in the Sierra Morena near Cordoba. And you just see him on the bus going into his office where he has a resource to put family members in touch with information about the former members of the rural guerrillas. And there's no voice at all. You just see this lovely gentleman who's, you know, like everybody's favorite granddad on the bus. And then you discover the story. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant for making you realize how these completely ordinary looking elderly people have done the most extraordinary things in their past. Adam, what for you is the thing you most admire in the film?
Well, I think you highlighted it, Joe, when you spoke about the women's voices, because to me, as someone who tries to write history, and for filmmakers who try to tell history on the screen, I think the thing that really brings history alive is when you hear the voices of the people who lived through it. And in that sense, this film was extremely pure. I think Julia was absolutely right not to have a narrator, whether male or female or anything else. You let the history be told in the voices of the people who lived through it. And to do that and make it into a coherent artistic narrative whole is a very difficult thing indeed. And I think it was done with enormous success in this film.
We have another question here from Marcia Waldstreicher. Marcia, are you there to give us your question live? Okay, while we're waiting to see if Marcia comes on live, I'll read out the question. Why was religion not mentioned in terms of motivation? Probably a question for Julia or Gary.
I mean, I think a majority of them, well, a lot of them were Jews and some were not. Julia, did we?
Can I make it a more specific question then?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I had asked something earlier that I was curious about religious and ethnic backgrounds as in terms of volunteerism before, during, and after these individuals served, male or female, and how that may have influenced them throughout their lives in either direction.
That's a very big question. Most of the women who were nurses, probably about out of the 80 or so, were or nurses or ambulance drivers or one way or another medical, were Jewish. As it turns out, even Martha Gellhorn had a Jewish grandfather, though she certainly didn't identify as Jewish. They were not observant Jews. There were no stories of candle lighting on Friday evening. But they were very much Jewish. There are even stories of operating rooms where there was a language problem between staff or even with a patient. And very often Yiddish, I was told, and I've read, Yiddish was a clarifying language. A lot of the doctors spoke Yiddish or knew Yiddish enough to understand it and to act on words in Yiddish. And a lot of the nurses came from Yiddish-speaking homes. As for the why of it, I leave other people to conjecture about that or answer that question. But if tikkun olam, which is to cure the ills of the world as best you can, is very much an order that Jews feel moved to act upon. And they were making the world a better place, they thought.
Got one question come in, which I think will make a great last question because we're coming up to the hour. It's a question from Kate Thorman. Are you there, Kate, to pose your question in person?
Yeah, hi. I was just curious, this is a wonderful film. And I was just curious if there was any great stories that you couldn't fit into the film that you would be able to share with us.
Fantastic question. Julia, Julia, Gary, to answer that one.
I don't remember anything. I think we managed to get in everything that we were particularly taken with. Can you remember anything, Gary?
I'm sure there was a lot more, but we were stripping down and trying to make the narrative make sense and follow a storyline. So there were lots of bits and pieces that, parts of the same stories probably. There were more interesting bits that got chopped off because they didn't, move the story along in a way. But I can't think of anything offhand that I was going like, wow, I wish we could have fit that in. I remember the struggle to fit in how we wrestled with how we fit in Helen getting wounded, just without visuals to support it, and wrestling for days on that and trying all different ways to. So, but I don't know, I don't really remember anything where I went, God, that was the only one and we managed to get it in where I didn't know how we would get it in, and so I would agree with you. I'm sure there were, I've heard interesting stories even from my great aunt, who certainly was not one of the front and center people, nurses there, but I couldn't come up with anything offhand.
Sorry.
I think you deserve congratulations for fitting so many women's voices in. It is really quite incredible, the number of women who you've managed to fit into that documentary, whether through reading their letters with an actor's voice or whether through a recorded interview with them where we can actually see them speaking, which is incredibly moving. So we're at the hour. We have to wrap up now. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us and logged in today. We hope many more people will watch the recording on YouTube later on. Thank you especially to our three panelists. Thank you to Mark Wallum as the Executive Director of ALBA for making this possible, doing all the publicity. Thank you to Dennis for doing all the technical stuff quietly in the background to make this work. Thank you to Maria for introducing the whole event. You may like to like ALBA on Facebook, where there is a Volunteer of the Week comes up. That's a very nice, I think, initiative from the archives. So you might want to look out for that if you like Abraham Lincoln Brigade Archives on Facebook, or log on to our website where there is a lot of information. You can read our magazine, The Volunteer. I can't resist, as a closing line, just mentioning something chilling, which the chair of ALBA's board, Sebastian Faber, posted on Facebook the other day, which is a recently elected Republican senator, whose name I've conveniently forgotten, talked in public about his loyalty to the Republican Party being because his father fought in World War II to save Europe from socialism. So your film is very necessary for even people who are just going to join the Senate. Sorry, I couldn't resist smuggling that in somewhere. It's horrific. Thank you so much. It's a wonderfully educational film, a wonderfully moving film. I found myself crying yet again when I watched it this afternoon, as I do every time. So thank you to everyone, and look out for ALBA's future events. We hope to have you join us then. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.